evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Nadia and this evening we are joined by Marion Fellows. Good evening, Marion.
Good evening, Nadia.
At least 82 Palestinians were reported killed in the last 24 hours as Israeli military operations continued across the Gaza Strip, with aid still not reaching civilians. Israeli forces intensified attacks on Rafah, Khan Yunis and central Gaza targeting what they said were Hamas command posts and tunnel shafts. IDF tanks advanced into Rafah, pushing deeper into the eastern neighborhoods and cutting off key roads as airstrikes continued to hit homes and shelters. A health crisis is worsening with Gaza's hospitals overwhelmed and rescue operations hampered by blocked roads and fuel shortages. The UN issued a warning that 14,000 babies could die in the next 48 hours if humanitarian aid currently stalled inside Gaza is not delivered to civilians. More than 35,000 Palestinians have been killed since the conflict began in October, according to Gaza's health ministry, including large numbers of women and children. In the occupied West Bank, Israeli operations continued with raids reporting to Tehran, Jenin, and surrounding villages where homes were damaged and arrests made. UN agencies and aid groups have again called for a ceasefire, warning that famine, disease, and displacement are pushing Gaza's population into total collapse. Marion? Shall we discuss on the matters which we have just mentioned on the Gaza Strip?
Hello?
Hello, Marion, can you hear me?
Sorry, I didn't catch that last bit. I'm so sorry.
Okay, shall we discuss on the Gaza Strip and what's happening in Palestine right now?
Well, it's just appalling, awful. Canada, France, Britain saying stop it isn't going to work. I suppose we've now reached the stage in foreign policy where unless Trump says stop it, it might not happen. But the UK government back in 2024, before the Labour government, were told we should ask for a ceasefire. Labour were against it, and then they changed their minds. But they haven't changed their minds or been nearly strong enough across the nations internationally. Yes, they're doing bits and pieces, but no one is actually saying to Israel, no more. They've stopped arms sales or are in the process of doing it, but all of this should have happened before things got to such an extent.
Yeah, thank you. We will be coming into the new bits of Palestine and Gaza news after the Ukraine updates. At least 13 civilians were killed and over 30 injured in the past 24 hours due to Russian attacks across Ukraine, as drone and missile strikes intensified. Russian forces launched a large-scale drone assault, deploying 108 drones, including Shash-type UAVs. Ukrainian air defenses intercepted 93 drones over multiple regions. In Dnipro Oblast, drone strikes damaged civilian infrastructure, including farms and businesses, causing fires and destruction in Zelenskivsky and Pavlohad districts. In Donetsk Oblast, Russian attacks resulted in civilian casualties. One person was killed in Siversk and multiple injuries were reported in Kramatorsk, Lyman and Kostavinska. Ukrainian forces reported that Russian military casualties increased by approximately 1,040 over the past day, reflecting ongoing intense combat operations. Following a call between US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, European leaders led by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz agreed to strengthen sanctions against Russia, targeting entities supporting Russia's military operations. The UK announced new sanctions against Russia, focusing on the military, energy, and financial sectors in response to the recent drone attacks on Ukrainian cities. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has called for a high-level summit involving Ukraine, Russia, the US, the UK, the EU to discuss comprehensive peace plan with potential hosts including Turkey, the Vatican, or Switzerland. The humanitarian situation continues to deteriorate, with international organizations warning of escalating civilian suffering amid ongoing and ongoing hostilities. Marion?
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
we'll be coming into the sanctions into another section, but if we can just discuss for.
Well, the sanctions against Russia have had what appears to be very little impact on Putin. Whether they're having more impact on the general Russian population hasn't changed Putin's mind, and it hasn't changed the minds of those who work closely with him. So I think we need to find something even more to try and stop this war, because everybody wants peace except Putin. And that's really, I don't know if more sanctions will make that change in any way, size, shape or form.
Thank you. And the UK government has suspended trade negotiations with Israel and imposed new sanctions in response to escalating military operations in Gaza and the West Bank. Foreign Secretary David Lammy announced the suspension in Parliament, citing the Israeli government's action as morally wrong and unjustifiable. He highlighted the severe humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where an 11-week blockade has left civilians facing starvation and limited access to essential aid. The UK has also summoned Israeli ambassador to express its concerns directly. Sanctions have been imposed on 3 individuals and 4 entities associated with settler violence in the West Bank. These measures aim to address the increasing violence and expansion of settlements, which the UK views as obstacles to peace. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, along with leaders from France and Canada, has condemned the Israeli military's actions, warning of potential further measures if the humanitarian situation does not improve. The international community continues to call for an immediate ceasefire and the unimpeded delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Is it too little, too late? What influence will this condemnation have on Netanyahu? Marion?
Moment, it seems very likely that Netanyahu will just ignore what's going on. I heard an Israeli spokesperson on the radio earlier, and she was still talking about getting rid of Hamas altogether, and they don't seem to understand or want to understand the amount of serious damage that they're doing to the Palestinian population, sending in 5 lorries when there used to be in the realms of 500 a day going in to Gaza before during the last ceasefire, and sending 5 with baby formula is just not going to wash. People are dying. Women who are lactating are starving. They can't feed their children. Children are going to bed hungry day and night. And it needs the UN. It needs a huge block of countries to say enough is enough. But will Netanyahu listen? Who knows? He might listen to Donald Trump, and he seems very, very slowly coming around to the idea that what's happening in Gaza is horrendous and has to be stopped.
Thank you, Marion. Given the level of arms sales in the UK, already complicit in the war games, what is your opinion on that, Marion?
Yeah, well, back when I was an MP, the group at Westminster, the SNP group at Westminster, called for the cessation of arms sale to Israel right back at the start of this, and nobody listened. Actually now, because they're still getting arms however they want, I don't know how much difference it's going to make. We need the United Nations, we need the whole world to say to Israel, this cannot go on any longer. This is genocide and it is illegal, and we have to stop it now.
Thank you, Marion. We will move on to the Russia, UK, and the UK and EU have placed fresh sanctions on Russia as the Kremlin refused to put a timeline on ceasefire talks with Ukraine. The UK's Foreign Office said a total of 100 further sanctions will target Russia's military, energy, and financial sectors. The new measures will target the supply chains of Russia weapons system, including Iskander missiles, Kremlin-funded information operations, financial institutions that help Russia evade sanctions, and ships in Kremlin's shadow fleet of oil tankers. Will these have any greater impact than the restrictions on Israel? Marion?
I doubt it very, very much. Russia has been under sanctions, and people, specific players in the Russian economy, have been sanctioned for many, many years, and it seems to have no effect. What we need is the US to change its attitude at the moment, apart from announcing that he would end the war in, what was it, 24 hours once he became president. Donald Trump needs to step up to the plate and tell Putin with no equivocation that we're going to sanction you and we mean it. But the problem is that he's done so many deals over the years with Putin and Russian oligarchs that it's really difficult to believe that he won't continue doing that, whatever the case is. I'm sorry to sound so pessimistic, Nadia, but I think we've had this conversation numerous times across numerous channels in the UK, and nothing seems to make a difference.
Thank you, Marion. And what more can be done? Like, do you think the sanctions can be more stricter, or only Donald Trump can bring a peace?
I think it's now down to the fact that although there's the willing got together by Keir Starmer are hoping to help Ukraine, we don't have the power, the might, the actual economic weaponry that will stop Putin in his tracks. I think only the States has that. Now, this is only a personal opinion, but we have all the Russian oligarchs seem to be leaving the UK since Labour got into power. That's not a bad thing. I'm just commenting on that. But we need proper sanctions that are totally and completely sorted, because Russia has had 3 years to find ways of evading what we've already put in place.
Thank you, Marion. Scotland's External Affairs Secretary has said the Labour government's new UK-EU trade deal was agreed without proper consultation with devolved administrations, despite its impact on key Scottish sectors. Angus Robertson criticised the process that led to a 12-year extension of EU fishing access to UK waters, describing the agreement finalised without involving the Scottish government in a meaningful way. The fishing extension replaces the previous system of annual negotiations from 2026 and was reportedly exchanged for a new sanitary and phytosanitary SPS deal to ease food and agricultural trade between the UK and EU. Robertson said that Scotland, as part of the UK put with responsibility for fisheries devolved to Holyrood, had not been given the detail or impact assessments to assess the trade-offs involved in the new deal. He argued that ministers were only given readouts rather than the input, and said Scotland should have been consulted in the same way EU member states are doing European Commission-led negotiations. Scottish Secretary Ian Murray, who spoke after Robertson's on BBC Radio, confirmed the Scottish government had been informed of the talks about and said trade is a reserved matter. Murray also noted that correspondence and exchanges had taken place at official levels and argued that the deal has broad support from businesses across the UK, including in Scotland. While the fishing industry has voiced opposition to the extended EU access, several sectors, including retail and energy, have welcomed the agreement's potential to reduce post-Brexit trade friction. The Labour government said the deal improves access to European markets, simplifies the food exports, and strengthens economic ties, though it confirmed that the Scottish government did not have a formal role in shaping the final agreement. Scotland, which voted to remain the EU in 2016, continues to face significant political and economic decisions made at the UK level, despite devolution of areas such as fisheries and agriculture to the Scottish Parliament. Given the Scottish fish processing industry accounts for 49% of the turnover of UK fish processing industry, why do you think the UK government not consult with the Scotland? Marion?
The UK government have never consulted Scotland in any size, shape or form, even before devolution had happened in 1999. Ted Heath negotiated our entry into the EU and sold Scottish fishermen down the river at that point. And that application has carried on ever since. The Scottish Government asked at various times while we were in the EU and during the negotiations on leaving the EU, even though Scotland didn't vote for that, to get a place at the top table because Scottish fisheries are worth more than the rest of the UK. And the then Tory government refused, and now Labour are doing exactly the same. It absolutely shows that Scotland and Scottish fisheries don't matter to the UK government. And I know that other businesses have welcomed the fact that we now have this, inverted commas, new agreement with the EU. But what it means is less red tape, which is good. It means that salmon fishermen, the salmon farmers are really happy, and other businesses are really happy that a lot of the red tape is away now, or is going to be vastly reduced, because that costs money to Scottish businesses. But even the deal agreed this week does not bring us back to anywhere like the economy we had when we were a full member of the EU. The effect of leaving the EU has been a drag on economic growth and wealth creation in the UK since ever Boris Johnson agreed the first deal and got us out completely of the EU. The fact that Ian Murray can say some businesses welcome it does not take away from the fact that we still are poorer and we still have more difficulties because we were pulled out of the EU, that is Scotland was, against our will, just because the rest of the UK voted to leave on quite often what were false promises and false premises.
Okay, I understand that. And so Mr. Murray said that the Scottish government was informed, but because fisheries being devolved, do you think not just informed, they should have consulted properly?
Of course, Scotland should have been at the top table when these negotiations were going on, as they requested time and time again during our time in the EU. And although there are arguments and people have argued that, oh, well, the SNP wants to go back into Europe, that's the current Scottish government, you're just going to sign away all your deals, all your fishing grounds anyway if you get back into the EU. That is not in fact the case. What we would be able to do is to negotiate on our own behalf for both the salmon farmers and the fishermen on the East Coast mainly.
And a final thought, is Scotland always afterthought, or were there good reasons for being ignored by the UK?
It's simply an afterthought. There was no good reason, because Scottish fishing, the fishing is devolved to the Scottish government. They have more people who work on a day-to-day basis and know what is going on. Whereas UK government can only talk about what goes on in England, basically, and they ignore Wales as well, and they generally ignore Northern Ireland, who have a separate Brexit deal because of their land border with the Republic of Ireland.
Since you mentioned Ireland, I have a final question in this particular topic. What do you think the solution to future EU relations for Scotland should be?
New relations the Scottish government needs to be respected, and both the Tory party, the Labour Party have said ignore Scotland's wishes, they ignore what's going on in Scotland, they use might is right, and they just run roughshod over what the Scottish Parliament has decided and what the Scottish Government has decided is best for Scotland. Now, I don't think we can make any great claims that reform will be any different, because although they are making headway in Scotland, and they will make headway in Scotland because they'll take votes from both the Tories and Labour, and in some cases Lib Dems in Scotland, it's going to be another overlord who doesn't understand the dynamic in Scotland is different on so many different levels.
Thank you. The Scottish Greens have criticised the UK government's new trade deal with the European Union, saying it does not reflect Scotland's interest on democratic choice. Party co-leader Patrick Harvey said the agreement secured by Labour ministers in London falls short of what Scotland needs and continues a pattern of exclusion from key decisions. He argued that the only deal that would serve Scotland properly is one that allows for EU membership as an independent country. The Greens say the agreement highlights the ongoing damage of Brexit, which Scotland rejected in 2016. Harvey said communities and businesses north of the border are still paying the price for a decision made elsewhere. While the party welcomes signs of progress on youth mobility and potential access to the Erasmus program, it said young people in Scotland have already lost out on key opportunities and that these measures should have been prioritised. The Green argued that Scotland's place in Europe and that future decisions on the trade rights and climate action should be made in cooperation with European partners, not imposed through UK-wide deals made without consent from devolved governments. Marion?
Absolutely. I mean, it's easy to say I agree, but I do agree. We need to be respected as part of the United Kingdom. We are not. Scotland's needs, and it's on things especially like immigration. In Scotland, we want more people to come. We need more people to come. We have an ageing population. Now, proof of that. We have an ageing population, and we need to encourage more people to come to Scotland to work, pay taxes, and become involved in the nation. That is strictly not going to happen as long as Keir Starmer follows the reform line on immigration and does deals and sends people back when we could use them in Scotland quite happily to help our economy grow and to help do things like look after our older people, to help in industries which, generally speaking, younger people across the UK and in Scotland don't want to do. So care work, hospitality work, all of that requires more bodies to do it. And we are being stopped by the UK government to encourage, and we cannot encourage people to come to Scotland because of the immigration laws and the new practices that the UK government are putting in place now as a result of the elections to local government in England earlier on this month.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Shell reported that it received 12.4 million from the UK government in 2024 despite operating extensive North Sea oil and gas activities. The company's latest filings show that it paid 8.6 million to the UK exchequer, but tax reliefs and prior overpayments led to an overall gain of 7.1 million for the year. The figures were published in Shell's annual payments to governments report, which covers payments related to extractive activities such as exploration and production of oil and gas. It does not include refining or natural gas liquefaction, which are detailed separately. In contrast to its UK position, Shell paid significantly more in other countries where it operates. Payments to the Norwegian government reached 3.4 billion, while Germany received 243 million. The UK figures follow a period in which Shell scaled back its investments in renewable energy projects. The company prioritized shareholder returns, distributing nearly 19 billion in payouts last year. Companies have criticized the imbalance between corporate tax treatment and the rising cost of living, linking continued oil and gas extraction to ongoing environmental and economic challenges in the UK. Climate conditions, including a dry spring, have affected farming while energy prices remain high. While Shell's extractive tax returns showed a net refund in 2024, wider figures for the previous year indicate that it paid 6 billion in total UK taxes, including 1.45 billion in corporation tax. The government has not issued a statement regarding the latest figures. What do these figures mean to the Scottish economy, Marion?
This means that we've still not got a just transition in North Sea. It shows that large conglomerate oil companies can actually change things to suit themselves, and that where they're overpaid tax, yes, they are entitled to rebates, but we're dealing still with a fuel emergency in Scotland. I read today that they're expecting fuel prices in Scotland and in the UK to drop 7% over the summer. Well, that's amazing. But come October, we'll be coming back into the colder weather, and we'll find that oil prices have gone up. We don't have the capacity for storage. We've lost the Grangemouth facility for refining oil, and we are in a place which means where when they were first elected, the Labour government said that they were going to take £350 off everyone's bill. That hasn't happened. And the best way to get money to pay people's bills is to take it from the oil companies, who are making excessive profits because of the way that the energy market works in the United Kingdom. I see that as part of the EU trade deal, they're looking at electricity stuff across the whole of Europe, and for the UK to join that. Now, that may be a good thing in the long term, but I have my doubts, because the UK is not good at dealing with Europe on equal, and now it never has been, and now we are out of the EU. Anything that affects gas prices or electricity prices is going to be, the cost of that is going to be paid for by people, especially in places like Scotland, where it's colder during the cold months, and that no one will benefit from this regime where we were supposed to be paying less by about £350 a year, according to Sir Keir Starmer. UK Energy has yet to make an appearance. It was an attention-grabbing headline, and at the end of the day, there appears to be no substance behind the UK government's energy programme that they actually said was going to happen last July.
Energies are reserved. What impact do you think the increase and extension of the UK government's energy profits levy has had on North Sea investment? Marion?
Well, it doesn't seem to have had any great impact whatsoever, because they haven't actually shown a just transition. People in Aberdeen are really worried that they're going to lose, they've already lost some jobs, and they're going to continue to lose jobs because the UK government does not have a proper just transition to take us from where we are just now and to where we should be. And where they are doing things on energy, it's building pylons and building cable and tunnel, extracting electricity from wind farms, and actually building ways of getting the electricity generated in Scotland from things like wind power. They're using it, they're sending it down to England. Now, that's not a terrible thing, but Scotland doesn't get the benefit of doing that. And in Scotland, we end up paying higher prices for energy when we are actually, through wind farms, etc., we are actually the ones providing most of the electricity that is non-oil and gas. So Scotland just seems to get done over in different ways by different governments. This is why we need our own way of moving forward. As you said, Nadia, energy is reserved to Westminster, and there's very little, realistically, that the Scottish Government can do without the acquiescence of the UK Government, and that is the frustrating part of all of this.
And the tax revenues as well reserved to the Westminster. Yes,
they go to England as well, or to the United Kingdom Treasury, and we get our pocket money back.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next topic. The Post Office has agreed to compensate hundreds of people caught up in the Horizon scandal after their names and addresses were mistakenly published online last year. The personal information of over 400 sub-postmasters was uploaded to a government website in June 2024. The list included those already seeking redress following one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in UK legal history. The Post Office has since described the error as serious and deeply regrettable. Compensation payments have now been offered. Individuals whose current addresses were disclosed will receive £5,000. Those whose previous address was included in the breach will be paid £3,500. According to the law firm Freeds, which represents most of the victims affected, nearly 300 people have already received payment and more are expected to follow soon. The post office says it's working with the Information Commissioner's office to prevent any similar incidents in future. The data breach follows the wider Horizon IT scandal, which saw more than 900 sub-postmasters wrongly accused of fraud due to faults in the post office's accounting system. Some were imprisoned and many others lost their jobs, homes and reputations. The UK government has set aside 1.8 billion for compensation across the full Horizon redress scheme. Victims can receive payments ranging from 10,000 to more than 1 million depending on the circumstances of their case. First report from the official Horizon inquiry covering the impact on victims and the compensation process is due to be published later this summer. What has happened here, Marion, and I know it's very close to your heart, this particular topic.
Yes, it is. The payouts at the moment are for a data breach, and they are very small amounts in comparison to what many sub-postmasters and former post office workers are entitled to. After the Mr. Bates versus the Post Office was shown on ITV, and there was a huge public outcry, quite rightly. This had been going on for years, and everyone understood that after the Exoneration Act was passed in the UK Parliament, covering Scotland, covering all parts of the United Kingdom apart from Scotland, which had to do its own act a day or two later, in spite of there being no real need for it, that what people thought everything was sorted, that people were applying and getting their rebate, getting their redress, and that everything was hunky-dory. That is not the case. Many postmasters are still waiting for redress. In fact, I've been involved in setting up the Scottish Postmasters for Justice and Redress to help postmasters apply for redress and to give them peer support, to provide peer support to them while they wait. But in the meantime, it's a labyrinth of paperwork. It's lawyers versus lawyers in actually working out redress. And if you were one of the postmasters who was charged and found guilty of any crime regarding which was not, you are exonerated if it was Horizon information and evidence that puts you in jeopardy. If you then decide that you're not going to accept the 600,000 which the government offered as a blanket figure for people to accept, then you go back to the back of the queue and you have to fight for every penny still. There are also hundreds and hundreds, thousands of postmasters who were never, ever prosecuted, but who every working week put 200, 300, 500, £1,000 into their post office account. Horizon told them they were short, and if they wanted to open up their post offices the next morning, they had to make sure that their accounts balanced. And so they simply put money in to the till so that they could open up to serve their communities. And even now, although the Horizon Shortfall Scheme was expanded and the amount of 75,000 people can claim up to, it doesn't cover what many people put in over the years. And of course, because of the way Horizon worked, they can't always prove that they did that. So for years, Post Office Limited and the Post Office Network has been reliant on postmasters paying these amounts of money regularly into the post office coffers, and it just is so unfair, so unbalanced. And one of the reasons we set up the Scottish Postmasters for Justice and Redress was to provide practical help to postmasters who are still suffering, many of whom are still afraid and are still absolutely traumatised by what they went through with Post Office Limited, that they don't want to come forward. They want nothing more to do with the post office. Now, the amounts of money being offered for some people will be adequate, but more than satisfactory. For others, it will never repay them for what has happened. You mentioned people killing themselves. You mentioned families being split up. I've seen it all. I've seen it where people who were married didn't tell their partners what was going on because they felt ashamed, because of the way postmasters were at the heart of their communities and everyone knew. And if the post office suddenly closed down, people believed it was because the postmasters had done something wrong. And in the meantime, Post Office Limited covered up all these mistakes. Now, Sir Wyn Williams is putting out his impacts, his first part of his report from the inquiry, and it will be telling, but it won't make up for lots of people whose lives were completely ruined, and many, many of them still haven't received the just compensation they are entitled to.
Quickly, what next for these sub-postmasters?
They're just waiting and waiting and waiting. At the moment, because the general belief is that all of this has been fixed and there's schemes and there's different things you can apply to, people believe that everything's sorted. And by no means is that the case. Recently, the government took some of the recompense mechanisms away from Post Office Limited, and it's now going to be dealt with by the Department for Business and Trade. But what that's done is added another 3-month wait. Folk like Alan Bates and folk like Christopher Head, who was the youngest sub-postmaster, who was involved in all of this, they're still waiting for their just reward. They're still waiting to settle finally with Post Office Limited. And if a postmaster decides that they lost more than 600,000 and they had been prosecuted, then they have to start their claim all over again, because if they say no, 600,000 isn't enough, they run the risk of losing that £600,000 because it has to start again. The whole thing has just been allowed to go on and on and on. And there isn't even an all-party parliamentary group anymore at Westminster who keeps prodding the government to make sure things are moving forward.
That's very sad. A recent YouGov poll indicates a significant shift in Scotland's political landscape, with the Scottish National Party set to reclaim numerous seats from Labour, suggesting a resurgence under First Minister John Sweeney's leadership. The poll projects the SNP securing 43 seats at Westminster, a substantial increase from the 9 held after last year's general election. Labour, which made notable gains in 2024, appears to be losing ground. The poll forecast Labour retaining only 4 of the 37 Scottish seats won last year, including Edinburgh South, East Lothian, the Western Isles, and Hamilton and Clyde Valley. Hamilton and Clyde Valley is the constituency. It's my mistake. Notably, Labour is projected to lose all seats in Glasgow back to the SNP. The rise of Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, is also evident, with the party projected to win 3 Scottish seats: Aberdeenshire North and Moray East, Dumfries and Galloway and Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale. These gains came at the expense of both the SNP and the Conservatives. However, Reform's overall impact may inadvertently benefit the SNP by fragmenting the Unionist vote, particularly affecting Labour and Conservative support. First Minister John Sweeney has acknowledged the shifting dynamics, emphasising the SNP's commitment to addressing the concerns of Scottish voters. He has highlighted the importance of unity and effective governance in the face of emerging political challenges. Poll surveyed 1,679 UK adults on May 18 to 19 with Scottish voting intentions showing the SNP at 28%, Labour at 19%, Reform UK at 18%, and Conservatives at 8%. As the political landscape evolves, the SNP appears well positioned to regain its prominence in Scottish politics, capitalising on Labour's declining support and fragmentation of unionist vote. What does this say about the political volatility in Scotland? How broken the UK first past post system is in the SNP can win if we can combine both the answer seats on 28% vote share in Scotland. The SNP has projected to have 28% of vote share.
I mean, although this poll is encouraging if you're an SNP voter, it means really not a lot. What is it, the common phrase? A week is a long time in politics, and there won't be another Westminster election until 2029. So things are likely to have changed quite a bit by then. But what it does at the moment show is how unpopular the Labour government are. Labour swept to power in Scotland, or got most MPs in Scotland on the basis of change. I don't think many people thought that the change that has happened was going to be what was offered to them. Getting rid of the winter fuel allowance, not scrapping the two-child benefit cap, all of that was almost underwritten in what people did when they voted in their droves for the Labour Party. They were sick of the Tories, absolutely. We were all sick of the Tories. But they thought they were getting something better. And especially, I believe, in Scotland, where there is a strong Labour tradition, where you voted Tory, your parents voted, you voted Labour, your grandparents voted Labour, your parents, everyone voted Labour when it was a socialist party. But this Labour government has proven one thing beyond all doubt. It is no longer a socialist party. It is a party that wants to be in power, and that they will shift, change their minds, pivot 360 degrees if that will ensure them power in a continuing line for years to come. And I don't think that's quite how things happen. The whole flexibility of voting, the whole way of what's happening in politics isn't just happening in the UK, it's happening right across the world, Europe, America, the same. So we shouldn't be too surprised by the poll, but I think there's something that the UK government of whatever colour never understands. And although I spent 9 years along with colleagues at Westminster trying to tell them Scotland is different, we care about people, we care about those worse off than ourselves, and we want to look after people. And no, there is nothing in the water system, which, by the way, has not been privatised. There's nothing in the water that compels people to vote SNP. I've had that conversation more than once with colleagues at Westminster. It's because inherently, I think Scotland wants what's best for the Scottish people, and we don't get that with a government that is focused on London, the South East, and only comes north when there's a panic about votes.
And what does it say about Nigel Farage's Reform Party's, the projections are they are going to win seats?
I think it says a lot about how both Labour and Tories have dealt with people over the years, taking them for granted, not listening to them, and actually ploughing ahead, even though saying one thing and doing another. There's been many polls and many papers written about why people have changed their vote. I mean, there was the red wall, which fell to the Tories, and now the Tories are in decline, and Labour are still not. I mean, Starmer won the last election on probably the lowest share of the vote for quite a long while. And I think this is going to continue for a number of years because people don't quite know which way to turn because politicians say one thing and do another. And that's their experience. So for some party like the SNP, we have to do what we say we are going to do. And that would be the route to success.
It's a huge, big topic to discuss, you know.
Yes,
I'll
it
move
is.
on to the next one. Scots have cut daily water use by 60 million litres following a public appeal to during the driest start to the year since 1964, with all of Scotland now facing some level of water scarcity. Scottish Water reported that demand peaked at over 2,000 million litres per day last week, driven by increased outdoor usage amid prolonged dry conditions. After urging households to conserve water, daily consumption has decreased by 60 million litres, enough to supply half of 5 for a day. The Scottish Environment Protection (SEPA) agency has designated much of the east coast from Moray to Dumfries and Galloway as experiencing moderate scarcity. The remainder of the country is on alert, except for the Inner and Outer Hebrides, which are at early warning status. Reservoir levels have fallen from 91% to 77% in the past week, significantly below the seasonal average of 90%. Despite forecast of light rain, authorities caution that substantial rainfalls is needed to restore normal levels. Scottish Water continues to supplement supplies in the affected areas, including parts of East Lothian, Aberdeenshire, South Ayrshire and the Highlands. Public is encouraged to maintain water-saving practices such as causing watering cans instead of hoses, taking shorter showers and operating dishwashers and washing machines only when fully loaded. SEPA warns that without significant rainfall, restrictions on water abstraction for agriculture and industry may be imposed. What do you think, Marion? Do you remember Scotland's last hosepipe ban in 1995?
Yes, yes, I do. I remember quite a few hosepipe bans, and I think the reaction to of the Scottish public to this is actually heartwarming because people are taking it seriously. You know, don't when you're brushing your teeth, don't run the tap, do all the sorts of things. And I can vouch for the fact that I no longer use my hose. I've been using a watering can and watering plants sparingly with that. I think it's something to do also with the fact that Scottish Water is not a private company. It belongs to the people of Scotland, and that they understand the dynamic behind it because there's always been a cohesive strategy. Not always been perfect, hasn't always worked well, and there have been a few surprises recently in terms of what people have been doing with the public money. But I think it's much easier, and because Scotland is a much more cohesive place, it's much easier to put out an appeal and get people to understand that actually they only benefit themselves. They benefit themselves as well as others if they heed the warnings and they cut the use of water and save as much as they possibly can.
Thank you, Marion. It's 200 years since the world's first comic was published, and it was created in Glasgow. The Mitchell Library is marking the anniversary with an exhibition of the Glasgow Looking Glass running until 31st July. The short-lived comic, first published in June 1825, satirized political and social life in 1820s Scotland. It features stories on Glasgow society, fashion, and events like the annual Glasgow Fair. Only 16 issues were printed before it ended in 1826, and few copies survive. Created by artist William Heath and printed by John Watson, one of the city's early lithographers, the comic later changed its name to Northern Looking Glass to reflect its wider focus. Though less well known than later titles like Punch, the Glasgow Looking Glass is considered the first modern comic and key moment in publishing history. The public event will take place on 7th June, including talks on the comic legacy and the launch of new version for 2025 that compares life in Glasgow then and now. Exhibition is located in the foyer on level 5 of the Mitchell Library and is open during regular library hours. What do you think, Marion? How hard will it be for the modern cartoonist to satirize political life today?
I don't think it'll be hard at all. There's a rich history of satirising and looking at life, especially in the west of Scotland, through cartoons. I well remember the Lobie Doser, Lobie Doser cartoons, and there's even a statue in Glasgow to Lobie Doser and his two-legged horse, El Fidelio. Now, it takes, I think, political cartoons and cartoons about public life and experiences do something to something to smile at is always to be welcomed, especially when times are rough and tough, as they have been over the centuries in Glasgow and the west of Scotland, and indeed the whole of Scotland. I think it's an exhibition. Thank you for mentioning it. I think I might take myself along to the Mitchell Library just to look at that. I know that it's Glasgow's 850th anniversary this year. 800th anniversary this year as well. And I think all of these things are worth exploring because in Scotland we have a history, whether it's written or drawn, of looking at ourselves and having a laugh at how we might appear over the centuries to other parts of the country and to ourselves.
Well, that's it for this evening, Scotland at 7. Thank you for our guest, Marion Fellows. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We were 16K short of our funding requirements in 2024, which has left us short of the money we need to pay our bills. We face cost of over 4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around 2,500. We have raised over 7,000 this year so far, but we still urgently need to raise at least 5,000 to pay our bills now. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you, and thank you again, Marion. Goodbye and thank you for watching.